Hey everyone, this is ShawNshawN. I do specials on eBay as well as sell my art on ShawNshawN.co. Today I'm going to review The Mule. So The Mule is a film directed by Clint Eastwood, as well starring in it. So this is always a danger when you do directing and starring because there's no one to really edit and cut back and really push back on the cut of the film, right? Because you're directing and starring in it, so you can't be cut from one of the parts. Probably both of the parts, right? So far, you know, Clint Eastwood's done a pretty good job doing movies where he's directing and starring, but it hasn't always worked out. I mean, Bradley Cooper's kind of venturing out. You know, you see issues maybe in the film that may or may not be there because he just don't have that balance between director, separate producer, separate actors, right? So Clint Eastwood stars as Earl Stone. So the star originally started when I think he's in his 80s. He's retired. He's a horticulturalist, so he takes care of flowers, grows his own flowers, really high end. And because he doesn't adapt to the coming of the internet, he gets forced out of business, right? They start doing 180 flowers, and they don't call it 180 flowers in there, so they don't have to brand it, but basically it's 180 flowers drives him out of business. So he loses his home and everything. And so he shows up to one of the parties, and by this time he's already missed like his daughter's wedding, most of his anniversaries with his wife, so now she's his ex-wife. So his family's pretty bitter at him for always putting his work before his family because he's such a perfectionist, and he had to drive all around the country to do all these deliveries of flowers, so he was always away from home on top of it. So he's a really bad father figure because of the nature of his business, and as well as not making time out for his family. So he probably could have made time out for his family and made it up, but he made the unfortunate mistake of not doing that, and then later obviously regretting it as his family gets further and further distance from him. So that kind of sets the stage for this character who's, you know, deeply flawed. He's also a Korean vet. They don't do anything covering that, so they just kind of throw into that, and they don't really use that much, so it really doesn't even matter that he's a Korea vet. So I thought they could have in the film maybe used parts of the Korea vet, maybe he calls up his old, but they do it in the sense that he still belongs to his old vet clubs and bails them out when they get in a dire need with the drug money he's starting to make. But, you know, in the scheme of things, it doesn't really resonate that much. So I mean, it resonates a little bit, but it just seems like he would have used that a little bit more as far as like kind of that backbone, you know, just a different generation, a war generation hero. It's very different. You can always see the mindset versus someone that skipped out the war, right? Like a John McCain versus John Kerry, you can see a huge difference. Well, not John Kerry, he's a bad example, but say Bill Clinton, who didn't go to the war, you can see a big difference between those characters. So this Earl Stone guy, he's down and out, he's lost his home, and then so this friend of the family approaches him and say, hey, I got this driving deal, all you do is drive, and he happens to be, you know, a local drug dealer. Friend of the family, which he didn't know. So he starts doing these deliveries, and because he's never had a record, because he's always a safe driver driving across the country, he's completely invisible on the aspect for cops or state troopers or anything. So he's the perfect drug mule. So he would pick up the drugs in this garage, and he drives across country to the locations they specify, parks in front of a hotel, leaves the keys in the car, comes back an hour or two later, they've dropped off the money, picked up the cargo, set deal, right? And so this goes along for a couple of deals, it looks pretty good, and they keep loading more and more drugs. He's never caught, there's never issues, right? But he does kind of get, as the money starts rolling in, he starts, you know, having girls at his hotels during the trip, and so just a little, you know, for the drug dealers, this is highly unprofessional, right? You don't want to be taking any kind of pleasure trips in the middle of a drug deal. Which makes sense. I mean, that's why he got in trouble in the first place, this Earl Stone. And he always put his job ahead of him, all these special events with. So he always enjoyed life, but on the road. So these guys just don't, you know, they never think that. They just want to drive there, boom, drop off the drugs, come back, end of the deal. And they're younger guys, so younger guys just drive straight through. They're not going to think of stopping at all these places to find the best barbecue on the side of the road or something. So it has this kind of animosity building a little bit between the gang and, you know, not being happy of him kind of going his own ways because he's in his 80s now, in his 90s. And of course, if you're 80s, 90s, you're totally set in your ways. You're not going to be flexible. And you're not going to take, no matter if people put a gun to your head, you're like, whatever, I'm going to live in 5-10 years anyway, so what difference does it make? So it's kind of a quandary for the drug dealer, but the top guy, who's played by Ander Garcia, is really cool. So it's a Mexican drug dealer, kind of, he's rolling this whole importation of cocaine up through the US. So basically they're just showing the Mexican side of the transportation. Obviously there'd be way more in a drug deal where there'd be transported from Colombia to Mexico, you know, but they just shorten it just to this drug mule story. So, you know, the top guy really kind of kind of likes this guy, and he invites him to this big party after they have this really big, huge shipment of like maybe 200 million. There he starts to meet some of the other figures of the drug family, and they're not as nice. They're definitely much more cutthroat, and the top guy's more, he's been there for a while, so he's very comfortable and he's kind of chill. But at the same time, there's this new DEA officer who's played by Bradley Cooper. He's trying to make his name. He's sent to Texas to make, you know, all these drug busts. And of course, he doesn't want to stay in Texas. He wants to stay in Texas, right? So he wants to go back to New York, Chicago, something where his family is. So he's just there to make a quick drug bust. And so he's investigating. He catches some of the local dealers connected to the same gang that the Mule is working for. Get this guy, they catch him with all this evidence, so they're like, all right, now you're going to be our snitch, right? So he's slowly building up evidence and getting more and more information on the drug trade. And they're trying to build a big case, right? They don't want to just make a small bust, because they keep catching these guys and the small time figures, and they keep throwing it to state police or local police, so it doesn't rise the suspicion of the drug gang that the DEA's onto them. It just looks like the state or local police is onto them. So the DEA, you know, going into the final act, they're kind of on, they know it's this particular pickup truck that's been driven, and then it kind of boils down to a very predictable end. Now the thing that's a little strange, I think one of the plot holes is the gang becomes wise. The police are kind of looking for a black pickup truck, and they see several black pickup trucks painted, pulled over right on the side of the road, and then you're thinking, well, on the next run, why don't they just have the truck repainted? Like how obvious is that, dude? You could have took a black truck, painted gray, and then painted blue, and then switched the car up, and it wouldn't have been a big deal, right? I don't know, maybe they just were very self-confident. This guy seems invisible every time. And the interesting part is Earl Stone actually meets the DEA agent at a restaurant, and they have a little conversation, which is right before the third act begins. So it's pretty interesting. And so at the end of the film, you don't know, is the drug gang gonna kill him, or is the DEA gonna catch him? So it's kind of this dynamic. And is he gonna make amends with his family at the same end? So he's slowly, with all the money he's pulling in, so he makes these larger and larger hauls. So he starts paying the education of his granddaughter. He shows up at his granddaughter's pre-wedding. He bails out the local vets association. So he's really kind of rebuilding his life, buys back his house, pays that cash, buys a brand new truck that's a really nice truck. So he's slowly rebuilding his house, but at the same time he's getting, you know, hooked on this easy money, right? And since his business was destroyed, he really doesn't have a business to go back to. But, you know, he could have bailed at any point. Like any drug dealer, you get hooked on that money and you think you'll get out. You obviously don't get out before the end, right? There's a few guys that do it, but usually you kind of get greedy and you're like, oh, I want to get here, and then no, I want to get here, and then woo, the police come in right before you get there, right? So very predictable end. I will say, I don't know, it's a decent drug movie. It's not as fun as like a normal kind of really daredevil, like the one I thought with Tom Cruise that came out, I think it was like last year or so, I don't remember the name, it escapes me, but that was a really fun movie where this guy's flying back and forth and flying the drug loads. Or Blow was a really fun movie as well, but also a very depressing note, because in the end it's very depressing. This one has a predictable end, so not too surprising. You know, these movies almost never have an unpredictable end, so that's kind of the shame with these drug bust movies, kind of like, you know what's happened in the end. So yeah, I think it was a pretty good movie overall. I just wish they would use the Korea War veteran a little bit more, like maybe he comes back at the gang with his skill set, or I don't know, it just seemed kind of, he was connected to being a vet, and I don't know, I mean, he wouldn't be combat ready, obviously, but I don't know, just something to that would have made more sense. Obviously, it's Clint Eastwood, so you know he's starred in all these, you know, Dirty Harry movies and all that, but whenever you go into a movie, you really have to kind of scrap that and say, like, what is the character doing, right? So, in that aspect, I kind of would have rounded it out a little better. There is a little bit of a happy ending, in the sense that he does become a gardener and focused on his flowers again, so... But at the same time, he doesn't make full amends with his family. They have a nice drama between those three elements. Overall, I think it's a pretty decent movie. There's other better movies out there, like the Spider-Verse is obviously better right now, or I didn't see Creed 2, but it's probably more interesting because it's less predictable maybe. Although, I didn't want to see it because it's just like another repetition of Rocky, right? So, anyway, yeah, I hope you guys like it. Give me a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching.